There is a midrash in which Moses is standing at the shores of the Red Sea. The water is raging, forming tremendous waves, roaring with the sound of thunder and crashing with all the power of a typhoon. As Pharaoh and his vast army are speedily approaching, it appears as though the Israelites have nowhere left to turn. Moses prays to God, pleading for the discernment to know what to do at this critical moment in which the fate of Israel is in extreme jeopardy. God instructs Moses to dive into the turbulent waters, according to this midrash. And Moses cries out, "Why do I always have to go first?" It's a story you won't find in the midrash, or you won't find in the Torah. You'll only find it in midrash, and truth be told, it's difficult to find there. There's another midrash, of course, in which someone by the name of Nachshon steps up and volunteers to be the first one to dive into what we now call the Reed Sea. We used to call it the Red Sea. Whether Nachshon was the first to enter the sea or Moses, and whether either of them had any misgivings about doing so, the fact remains that leadership is about stepping forward and modeling the right thing to do in the hopes that others may take your lead for the benefit of the entire community. In this week's Torah portion, Parashat Pinchas, Moses learns that Joshua has been chosen to take the reins and lead the Israelites into the promised land. Here, Moses has faced Pharaoh on numerous occasions, demanding that he let my people go. And Moses has encouraged and inspired the people to gather and march out of slavery towards liberation. And yet, in God's infinite wisdom, it is decreed that Moses would not be the one to take the Israelites on their final journey of redemption, when they would finally enter the promised land. Perhaps this is to teach us that the leadership of the Jewish people is too important to rest in the hands of a mere mortal, a single individual, or even a triumvirate of such veritable leaders as Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, none of whom actually make it to the promised land. If Moses, Miriam, and Aaron did everything for the Israelites, then they would be revered perhaps as gods themselves. And that was not the intention. By showing us that even the greatest leaders of Israel have their limitations, we learn that leadership is meant to be passed from one group of leaders on to the next, so that the community has the benefit of every leader's unique talents and skills. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk taught that even after Moses had come to terms with the fact that a new leader would succeed him, he still had concerns about the qualities that leader would possess. At the end of last week's Torah portion, we learn about Pinchas, a leader whose name is associated with this week's Torah portion. Pinchas was quick to judge and extreme in his actions. More on that another time. When he saw an Israelite man with a Canaanite woman, he took it upon himself to take their lives. A man like that could never be worthy to lead Israel into the promised land. According to Rabbi Menachem Mendel, Moses reasoned that the people needed a leader who was less of a judgmental zealot and more of an understanding and patient individual, able to speak to the hearts of everybody in the community. In this week's Torah portion, when Moses cries out to, quote, the God of the spirits of all flesh, it's from Numbers chapter 27, verse 15, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev observed that Moses recognized that the new leader would need to love all the members of the community equally, without showing any favoritism, for example, to the wealthy over the poor, and I'd like to believe the men over the women either. A worthy Jewish leader would need to always be conscious that God created all people b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that leader would need to love all the people, just as God loves all the people. A rabbi known as the Tzvi Yisrael discerned an interesting lesson about leadership from this week's Haftarah portion. After the prophet Elijah speaks truth to power at King Ahab and especially Queen Jezebel, he soon finds himself hiding out in a cave, fearing for his life. And we learn that God first comes to Elijah as a great and mighty wind. In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verses 9 and following, we are told, "There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of God. But God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a thin, small voice." According to the Tzvi Israel, the fire was like the zealotry of Pinchas, and the wind was his compassionless judgment. With the sign of true leadership, but rather the sign of true leadership is in the still, quiet voice of good, sweet, motivating, and sometimes inspiring words and deed. To be a leader is to touch each heart and to perceive the unique qualities that makes every individual a blessing. To lead is to embrace all our people and to love them. I have confidence in the incoming Board of Trustees at Temple Shalom to be ready, willing, and able, like Nachshon, to be the first to dive into chaos with the faith that God will help us through. I'm certain that they will spurn the zealotry of Pinchas in favor of the optimism and compassion of Joshua. I have no doubt that they will listen for that still small voice of God, to know what to do to help guide us through the wilderness. And I just have to say, I'm really excited to have the privilege to work with each and every one of them. So at this point, I would like to invite President David Schaefer, Vice President Debbie Heckman, Vice President Patricia Polk. I don't think she's here tonight. Oh, Patricia. All right, good. I got another part for you afterwards. Patricia, Treasurer Ivan Schiffman, Secretary Nancy Brittingham, and Trustees Matthew Abel, Brenda Fegley, Marilyn Leaf, Betty Ann Cinco, Scherer. Did I get that right? What did I do? Betty Ann Scherer. Sorry about that. Sandy Cinco, Joel Spector, and Ann Waldman to come join me on the bima as we all rise so that I can open the ark in order to officially install them as Temple Shalom's Board of Trustees with words of blessing.